Well, today, Donald Trump called Elon Musk a liar. He couldn't do it himself. He couldn't do it himself because he's afraid of Elon Musk. So you will be surprised to discover how far down the chain of command Donald Trump had to go to find someone to call Elon Musk a liar. And that happened on a day when Clarence Thomas decided to disgrace himself publicly once again by going to the Oval Office to do the swearing in of Donald Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Now, have Supreme Court justices participated in swearing-ins of that sort before? Yes. However, no president of the United States, in his first week in office, decided by his own hand to write out a provision of the United States Constitution, to simply write out, cross it out, birthright citizenship. Clarence Thomas knows that all the litigation that will come from that is coming to him. Clarence Thomas knows that the Oval Office he walked into today houses a president who believes he can simply strike lines from the Constitution. Clarence Thomas knows that the Justice Department that Pam Bondi will be running will be defending that action in the United States Supreme Court. He knew he went into a room of Supreme Court litigants today where he should not have been. But Clarence Thomas apparently believes there is no depth of disgrace that he cannot willingly fault to for Donald Trump. And so he added that disgrace to his public record today. And today, the 16th day of the Trump presidency, Donald Trump called Elon Musk a liar in writing. Donald Trump didn't do it himself because he's no doubt counting on Elon Musk to take care of many of his personal debts, including the $83 million that he owes to E. Jean Carroll for her successful lawsuit against him, and the $500 million he owes to the state of New York because of Attorney General Letitia James' successful lawsuit against him. So when the day came that the Trump team had to call Elon Musk a liar publicly and in writing, who was the brave Republican who stepped forward and said, "Boss, I'll do it"? It wasn't any of the cabinet members who have already been confirmed by the Senate. The person who got the assignment today in the Trump administration to call Elon Musk a liar publicly is Jonathan Blum. He's a former lobbyist for the banking industry and is now a political appointee at the Treasury Department, where he worked during the first Trump presidency. He has a mid-level job with the title Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Legislative Affairs. What that translates to is he is a lobbyist for the Treasury Department, a lobbyist with Congress. Working on legislative affairs in the Treasury Department means that he has to keep in occasional touch with the Senate Finance Committee staff and the House Ways and Means Committee staff on legislative matters involving the Treasury. Absolutely nothing meaningful happens at Jonathan Blum's level of the Treasury. He might not even get to speak to the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, just the lower ranking staff. Anything of significance that the Treasury Department needs to say to the Senate Finance Committee is said by the Treasury Secretary. And so when Senator Ron Wyden, who has served as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and now in the minority serves as the top Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, which is still a very powerful position, that in a committee which has jurisdiction over the United States Treasury, when he writes to the Treasury Secretary is supposed to respond. Senator Ron Wyden wrote a letter of complaint to the Treasury Secretary about Elon Musk taking control of the United States Treasury, taking control of the actual payment mechanisms in the United States Treasury, something no Treasury Secretary has ever actually seized control of. Senator Wyden got a reply letter today that the Treasury Secretary himself, Scott Bessent, who should be impeached and won't be for allowing Elon Musk to violate the integrity and security of the United States Treasury, was afraid to sign. Treasury Secretary was afraid to sign this letter. The letter says that Elon Musk's band of unnamed computer operators, quote, will have read-only access to the coded data of the Fiscal Services Payment System. Read-only access? Really? Does Elon Musk seem like a read-only guy to you? Does Elon Musk seem like someone who would accept read-only access anywhere? Or someone who wants his hands on the controls? Elon Musk says he has much more than read-only access. Last weekend, when we first learned of Musk's raid on the United States Treasury, where he was seizing the controls after a Treasury official was removed from his job on Friday by the Treasury Secretary so that Musk could do whatever he wanted to do, Elon Musk wrote at 1:52 a.m. on Saturday that he, quote, discovered, among other things, that payment approval officers at Treasury were instructed always to approve payments, even to known fraudulent or terrorist groups. That is, of course, a deeply pathological lie by someone whose commitment to public lying is as consistent and strong as Donald Trump's. And then, little more than 24 hours later, on Sunday morning at 3:14 a.m., Elon Musk said the Department of Government Efficiency team is rapidly shutting down these illegal payments. That is not read-only access. That is exactly what provoked United States senators like Ron Wyden to demand an investigation and an explanation in writing from the Treasury Secretary. And what Senator Wyden got from someone several rungs down from the Treasury Secretary was, first of all, the insult of not getting a reply in writing from the Treasury Secretary himself. And believe me, that was deliberate. Within the protocols of the Senate and the Treasury, that was a very deliberate insult by the Treasury Secretary in reaching so far down below him so that he could force Jonathan Blum to sign a letter saying that Elon Musk was lying about shutting down payments at the Treasury, that Elon Musk just has read-only access. So what is the truth? What access does Elon Musk actually have? And the answer is, and it always will be, we have no idea. There's no reason to believe Elon Musk because he's an inveterate pathological liar, as he has demonstrated on virtually a daily basis for the last few years. And there's no reason to believe the Treasury Secretary or the utterly powerless Jonathan Blum. So tonight, we don't know what access Elon Musk has in the United States Treasury. What we do know is that the correct amount of access, the legal amount of access for Elon Musk in the Treasury is exactly zero. He is not allowed by law to read anything in the possession of the Treasury that isn't already public information. And since the news emerged of Elon Musk's invasion of the Treasury, Donald Trump, who it seems is very afraid of Elon Musk, is sitting idly by as Elon Musk has moved on to invading Medicare and Medicaid. That's right. Elon Musk now has access to all of your Medicare information. Elon Musk now has access to every medical service Medicare and Medicaid has ever provided for you or anyone in your family or anyone you know. The Treasury letter about Elon Musk does not say whether Elon Musk has copied all of the Treasury Department's data on every taxpayer in America and all of that data on Medicare and Medicaid? That's a question that senators want answered. Has Elon Musk made copies of Treasury data and other government data? That's the question everyone in the country wants answered. And there is no answer to that question in Jonathan Blum's letter. And remember, if anyone in the Trump administration like Jonathan Blum does try to tell you tomorrow or the next day that Elon Musk has not copied all of the Treasury Department's data on every taxpayer in America, there is no way to verify that. We will never have a way to verify that. It is now impossible to know and will always be impossible to know how much data Elon Musk has illegally seized just this week from the United States of America. Elon Musk now has access to, and there is nothing preventing him from having permanent possession of, all the data that exists on every American taxpayer and all the data that exists on every Social Security recipient and all the data that exists on everyone with a Social Security number, anyone who's ever been paid in any form, salary or otherwise, by the United States government. And along with all of that, Elon Musk has access to and possible permanent possession of all the medical data of every Medicare recipient, every Medicaid recipient. And just pause for a second to consider just how much the Medicare data alone would be worth to, say, the pharmaceutical industry. Data is money. Elon Musk now has a lot more money in that data. Elon Musk has seized the most valuable, marketable data that exists in the world. And every bit of that seizure is illegal. It violates privacy laws and other laws. Law professor David Super told the Washington Post, so many of these things are so wildly illegal that I think they're playing a quantity game and assuming the system can't react to all this illegality at once. Empowered by the United States Supreme Court, telling him that it is impossible for the president to commit a crime, Donald Trump is now violating the law at a faster pace than he has ever violated the law in his life. Donald Trump is finding new ways to break the law in Washington every day. And tonight on the Senate floor, Democrats are taking an all-night stand against the confirmation of a Trump nominee who has promised in writing to violate the law. Donald Trump's choice for budget director, Russell Vought, is an author of Project 2025, as I'm sure you've already heard, which advocates budgetary law breaking that Russell Vought promises to carry out by refusing to spend the government funds that Congress orders spent on some programs. And that is against the law. But if you violate that law, you don't get arrested. It's not a criminal law. You just get sued. And then a judge might or might not order you to obey that law. And if it goes to the Trump Supreme Court, there's no telling what might happen. But no matter what does happen, there will be no enforcement power for the judge's order in Donald Trump's Washington. What you're seeing now is the suit and tie version of January 6th. Trump vandals attacking the Capitol nonviolently, attacking the Capitol with a simple defiance of the Constitution that has put Congress in charge of taxing and spending since the beginning of this country. So a group that is operating completely unbound by the law wants you to believe that Elon Musk has read-only access to the data. They want you to believe they're being very careful about what Elon Musk, the most reckless person you can imagine, can do with that data. Here's the thing they should not ever be able to get you to believe, that there's a good reason for Elon Musk to have your name, your birth date, your address, your social security number, your medical history. Elon Musk has all of that tonight and more, and for no good reason. And Donald Trump is letting Elon Musk do that as out of control as the first Trump White House was. They never allowed this to happen. The 4 White House chiefs of staff in Donald Trump's first White House didn't allow the biggest data breach in the world at the United States Treasury and at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. Donald Trump's new White House chief of staff, Susie Wiles, was profiled as the adult in the room in Trump world. The Washington Press Corps cannot let go of the idea that there will be an adult in the room with Donald Trump who makes sure that the bad stuff doesn't happen. It has never been true, but the Washington Press Corps clings to that idea. And so far, the new White House chief of staff is the weakest White House chief of staff in the history of Donald Trump White House chiefs of staff. She is having the worst start of any Trump White House chief of staff. In the pre-Trump era of American government, a Treasury Secretary would be impeached and removed from office for giving the richest person in the world the keys to the Treasury. But the Republicans in the House of Representatives control the impeachment process, and so everyone in the Trump administration knows anyone can get away with anything and never be impeached. Standing against Donald Trump and Elon Musk now are Democratic members of the Senate and the House, where today Democrats in the Government Oversight Committee tried to subpoena Elon Musk.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's outrageous that this committee will not even entertain a motion.
No, you state your...
Chairman, that's not a point of order.
Somebody who's breaking the law and dismantling our federal agencies.
You're
out of order. And you will not even entertain a motion to bring this to the President.
As many as are in favor of tabling.
Yes, let's have order in this country.
Stansberry, you're out of order. You know you're out of order. You know the rules of this committee. There's been a motion.
Mr.
And a
Elon Musk is out of order and dismantling.
He's out of order.
God.
I call the question.
There's been a motion and second. Motion by Dr. Fox, second by Mr. Higgins to table. All those in favor of tabling signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.